This video contains major spoilers for Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition. Ori is a game that I was expecting to enjoy. I generally like Metroidvanias, and it has glowing reviews. However, I was not expecting it to be one of the most surprising games that I've ever played. I first played it probably 5 years ago, and it instantly became one of my absolute favorites. It serves as a breath of fresh air for the Metroidvania genre, and is one of the most unique takes on a well-established formula. I'm Ouroboros. Let's talk. The world of Ori and the Blind Forest is a simple one. Everything takes place within the Forest of Nibel. At the heart of the forest is the Spirit Tree. Our protagonist, Ori, is a forest spirit who is blown away from the Spirit Tree as a newborn and is taken in and raised by a forest creature, Naru. Ori grows up, but the Spirit Tree sends out a beacon to call Ori back. This sets off an unfortunate series of events that causes the forest to fall into disarray. Food becomes scarce, water becomes poisoned, and Naru eventually dies due to starvation. Ori decides to journey to the Spirit Tree and meets Sign, your companion for the adventure. Sign instructs you to restore the elements of water, wind, and warmth in order to restore light to the forest. And that's really it for all the setup for Ori and the Blind Forest. I honestly love the simplicity of it. Even just writing the script, this section is less than half of some of my other videos. But that's the beauty of it. It's such a wonderful change of pace for me, and probably for a lot of other people. This isn't some big, grand, 100-hour RPG adventure. It's smaller, more personal, more intimate. It honestly gives me bedtime story vibes. Moon Studios even stated that the plot was heavily inspired by stories like The Lion King and The Iron Giant. And they nailed this feeling. The opening is so whimsical. There's a playful nature to watching Ori grow up. Obviously, something bad has to happen in order to move the plot forward and start the coming-of-age story, but seeing Ori and Naru build the bridge with all the vibrant colors and beautiful music gives everything this ethereal feel. Like you can really tell this was a good time for the two of them. I think there's a time in most people's lives where we can look back on with childlike innocence and nostalgia. And while this plot gives you a reason to play the game, it's never overbearing. Other than the opening, you're never sitting around watching cutscenes for more than 5 or so minutes. Even then, a lot of the opening is playable. There's also no crazy lore or hidden meanings to the game. It presents everything to you pretty directly. It's very understated. And I think more games need to go about this approach. I would much rather have a snappy, quality 10-hour adventure than a bloated 100-hour one. I think this is something that can probably only be accomplished by a smaller studio. Most AAA developers are going to go big or go home because of the massive cost of producing a new game. Regardless, I love the story here because of its elegant simplicity. Kuro is also a great antagonist. She's very imposing when you first meet her because she's by far the largest enemy in the entire game. However, the short glimpses into her backstory really sell her as a character. Obviously, an owl is going to hate the light. They're nocturnal, after all. Given the nature of the plot, that would be enough for her to be a suitable villain, but Moon Studios gave her great motivation. She's just a mother trying to protect her last egg, and it's not like her actions are completely unjustifiable. It's basic instinct to protect your children, and Kuro knows that there's a chance the Spirit Tree might try to call back Ori again. And it's not like the Spirit Tree is completely innocent here. It did kill Kuro's chicks, so everything just boils down to a really terrible situation. I love how Kuro's eyes change colors after her chicks die. It's almost like they're burning with white-hot rage, or as if they've been scorched by the light. The ending is just so good, too. She sacrifices herself to save not only her remaining egg, but also the rest of the forest, and seeing her egg hatch is the perfect payoff for her redemption. I've said it before, but I love the simplicity of this game. There's rarely any dialogue. Most of it is just narration from the Spirit Tree, which again gives it this feeling of a children's story. And Moon Studios did a great job of conveying so much emotion through characters' motions and their facial expressions. Gumo somberly looking at the remains of his race, and Kuro racing back to save her chicks are great examples. It's such a nice change of pace to have a smaller plot in a sea of massive journeys. However, the gameplay in Ori is anything but simple. One of my favorite parts about Ori is how quickly you get new abilities. Since the game is so short, you're constantly exposed to new and interesting game mechanics. I'll probably get some flack for this, but one of my biggest issues with Hollow Knight is that your toolkit doesn't change very much from the beginning of the game to the end. And because that game is so massive, it can feel like the progression can become very stagnant. Ori doesn't have this issue. You can only run and jump at the start, but by the end you're double jumping, bashing off projectiles, gliding with the feather, dashing across gaps, climbing onto walls, and tons more. And this is something that a Metroidvania should strive for. You get a great sense of power, pride, and fulfillment by the end of the game. Well, I say this is a Metroidvania, but it feels more like a hybrid between a Metroidvania and a Zelda game. You've obviously got this big, expansive, interconnected world, but a lot of the areas are segmented. You're probably only going to travel to each area once, and maybe pass through it on the way to the next dungeon. However, this is mostly due to the new fast travel system that came in the Definitive Edition. I think it was implemented well. There's teleporters at each major area. They're enough to give you a few checkpoints, but they're not so plentiful that it completely negates traversal. I like that the map is lightning quick to pull up. It's not like some other games where you have to navigate through a few menus to access it, and this makes exploration so much easier. If there's one part about the gameplay I don't like, it's the combat. When I first played Ori, I didn't enjoy it too much because I felt like the combat was really shallow, and it is. And I still really wish that you had more options other than just mashing fire. But there was a point when I realized that this game isn't about the combat. It's about platforming. This is where my view of the game really shifted. Lo and behold, that was right around the time when Ori introduced one of the greatest abilities in any game, the bash. I could honestly make an entire video about this upgrade and its applications. It's a really simple concept. It just allows you to bounce off projectiles and enemies. But what I love so much about it is how it manages to completely recontextualize the entire game. Enemies are now a springboard to launch yourself into the air. Projectiles are now temporary platforms for you to cross vast chasms. Projectiles are now your projectiles. You're now able to complete long gauntlets of platforming challenges without ever touching the ground. You're able to use enemy projectiles to launch into breakable walls or kill enemies. I can't overstate just how game-changing this ability is. I don't think I've ever seen another power-up have such a drastic effect on gameplay in any game. And Moon Studios does such an amazing job at having other upgrades combo with the bash. Sometimes you're a little early and have to slowly fall with the feather to wait for another projectile to bash off of. Sometimes you have to charge jump, climb up a wall, and double jump to bash off something. What really takes the cake is the light burst. It seems like a basic grenade until you realize you can bash off of it. You'd think this would add a ton of new complexity and challenge. However, this was something that was added in the Definitive Edition, so they couldn't really change many of the puzzles. And I wish we could have seen this combination more fleshed out. I also really like how you can bash projectiles through portals and solve puzzles. One of the many good things about Ori and the Blind Forest is how it not only doesn't punish you for dying, but it expects you to. Granted, I'm not very good at platformers, but Ori is a tricky game. There are a lot of tough platforming sections. But the save system gives you the initiative to make your own checkpoints. Of course, it's inherently limited by the amount of energy cells you have, but it forces you to make a decision. Do you try to make it to the next break to preserve some of your energy, or do you play it safe to bank on being able to make it through to the next section? It forces you to make some tricky cost-benefit analyses when the game gets difficult. Fortunately, the respawns are lightning quick. There's no crazy game over screen, it just immediately sends you right back to your last soul link. I can't imagine playing this on One Life, where, as the name implies, you can't die. People who play modes like this, or Dread mode and Metroid Dread, are just built different. Regardless, this game teaches you by letting you fail, but there's one part early game that teaches you by showing. I'm of course talking about Gumo. This is where the game introduces these lasers. You can't tank through them, they one-shot you no matter what. But watching Gumo work around them shows you how to approach some of these sections. It honestly reminds me a lot of the animals in Super Metroid teaching you how to wall jump. Another small thing is that in Blackroot Burrows, there's a large section where you have to carry around an orb. Well, if you fall off on some of the platforming sections, the orb will make its way back to you. I know this is basic game design to prevent you from getting soft-locked, but it's mainly just a nice quality of life addition. I also really like some of the achievement names. Run for Your Life appears at the start of the Ginzo Tree escape, and Love pops up when Kuro is reminded of the pain of losing a child. The best part about the gameplay is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. None of the mechanics become boring because it's always moving on to the next one. It gives you enough to crave more, and then immediately moves on to the next idea. I think the dungeon design is really cool in this game. Obviously, the Ginzo Tree is going to feel really fast-paced, given it's where you get the bash. It's also super fun playing with the teleporters and their respective puzzles. It obviously is very reminiscent of Portal, which is never a bad thing. The Forlorn Ruins contrast that by being more methodical. You slowly inch your way through a dungeon, playing with a lot of fun gravity-based puzzles. And Mount Horu is your test of everything you've learned, a culmination of the game and a test of your mastery over Ori. I do wish they could have implemented puzzles related to controlling the flow and level of lava instead of basically just doing one room after another, but it's still an awesome dungeon. The escape sequences reflect this really well, not only mechanically, but also thematically. The Ginzo Tree is a frantic race against the rising water, the Forlorn Ruins has a systematic stealth section where you flee from Kuro, and the Mount Horu sequence has you racing to escape the erupting volcano, while also trying to evade Kuro. It's cool to see each element reflected in the escapes as well, the Ginzo Tree being the element of water, Forlorn Ruins being the element of winds, and Mount Horu being the element of warmth. Despite being the first, I think the Ginzo Tree escape is by far the best of the three. I think it may very well be my favorite section in any game, so I'm just going to let it play out for a second here. Just like the rest of the game, you learn by failing. You have to complete the entire escape sequence in one go. There's no checkpoints or places to rest, it's just full steam ahead. And you're going to die. It's a frantic escape sequence that caps off the dungeon really well. You're forced to recall everything you've just gotten used to about the bash and teleporters. Moon Studios used the dungeon as a safe space to get used to the new mechanics, and the escape is your test. It's almost like a barrier that you have to cross or a license that you have to obtain. They're saying, hey, you've had your fun with this cool new mechanic, we've got a ton more in store for you, but you need to prove that you're ready for it. You get all of these small little challenges, and then the end is just one quick bash after another, water bursting all around you. It all climaxes at Ori's eventual close call. You're given a nice moment to breathe, to enjoy your triumph. The music calms and you get to see the beautiful water flowing from the tree, a confirmation of your success. All of that is cut short by Kuro. A reminder that this journey isn't over. This is your highest high at this point in the game, only to be cut down and nearly killed. Ori's kindness towards Gumo is the only thing that lets you survive, and Kuro is just so intimidating here. This is the first time you've interacted with her. And while the next two escape sequences are intense because of her presence, you never feel as insignificant as you do here with her terrifying aura looming over you. I just love everything about the Ginso Tree escape. It's Ori in the Blind Forest at its peak. Peak gameplay, peak storytelling, peak music, and peak world building. I personally love the area right after the Ginso Tree escape. It's such a great palate cleanser. You have the heart-pounding action of the escape, then the dark atmosphere of the Kuro encounter. Then you awake at the bottom of a waterfall. A beautiful spring with vibrant blues and greens. And this isn't the only well-crafted area in this game. In fact, the entire world feels handcrafted. Every room, every tree, every plant feels specifically designed for that particular spot, which feels very different from a lot of games. There's bound to be a lot of repetition, whether it's with trees or rocks or a similar tile set, but again, because Ori is a smaller game, Moon Studios made every room feel unique. The color palettes really add to this. Forested areas are a bright green that pops. The Forlorn Ruins feel heavily futuristically designed with all the runes and floating platforms. These are just a few examples, but they're all so wonderfully crafted and distinct from each other. There are also so many small details that enrich this game. Objects appearing in the foreground and Ori gasping for air when surfacing from the water are great examples. However, sometimes those foreground objects can block your view. I had a few times where foreground objects would obscure an enemy. There was also a room in Mount Horu where I couldn't tell where to go because I didn't realize I could pass under a platform. I thought it was solid all the way through. However, these are minor inconveniences, and they are few and far between. I will gladly take a trade-off for a game that is as environmentally beautiful as Ori. The music is also just stunning. I've already mentioned the music that plays during the Ginso Tree escape, Restoring the Light, Facing the Dark. But there are so many other amazing tracks here, like Naru, Embracing the Light. Completing the circle is also great. Composer Gareth Coker did an amazing job capturing the feel of a woodland spirit going on an adventure to restore the light to the forest. I think this game parallels Firebird Suite from Fantasia 2000. Side note, if you've never seen Fantasia 2000, it's an amazing film. I'll always have a soft spot for it because it was the first movie I ever saw in theaters. Anyway, the Firebird Suite is all about life, death, and rebirth, as well as the eruption of Mount St. Helens. A young forest spirit awakens the phoenix inside the volcano, and the Firebird proceeds to destroy everything with its inferno. The spirit gives way for new life, and the ecosystem is reborn. Sound familiar? A forest spirit, a bird, a raging fire from a volcano, and a great rebirth of life. I don't know if this was intentional, but it was the very first thing I thought of when the credits rolled. I first played it probably 5 or so years ago, and I bought it and Will-O-the-Wisps recently when they were both on sale. I've grown to appreciate it more now than when I first played it, and I'm eager to play through its sequel. It serves as a palate cleanser for modern-day games. It's short. 100%ing Ori won't take more than 15 or so hours. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making a short game and charging $20 to $30 for it. In fact, I applaud Moon Studios for it. By making it shorter, it allows you to constantly experience new mechanics and forces you to consistently prove your mastery over Ori. The dungeons are well crafted, and the escape sequences, especially the Ginzo Tree escape, are the best in the industry. And it's a remarkable achievement that this was Moon Studios' first game. Ori and the Blind Forest environments envelop you in beauty and awe, is complemented by a stellar soundtrack, and perfectly encapsulates that childlike wonder. Thanks for watching.